Oh, now. So, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Erşahin, the clinical lead of the Spiritual Care and Counseling Department at the Social Sciences University of Ankara. We welcome you to the 32nd International Seminar on Intercultural and Interreligious Pastoral Care and Counseling. The lecture of today is about our experiences of care and counseling in virtual spaces, and we have a pioneering figure in integrating technology into counseling practice in the UK. We welcome Dr. Hanley, who is the Associate Director of Research for the School of Environment, Education and Development, and the Reader in Counseling Psychology within the Manchester Institute of Education. It's an honor to have him here with us, not only for his expertise, but also as a colleague and everlasting supervisor of mine. Thank you for joining us, Terry.
Well, thank you for having me.
Today's lecture will be about whether and to what extent the concept of virtual spaces could help us in making room for deeper diversity in care and counseling. But of course, to start with, I would like to start with what really brought you to the online counseling area. Why did you get interested in online counseling to start with?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, particularly as my background. So my background was working as a counsellor and a psychotherapist with children and young people. And lots of my work was very creative. So it involved using artwork or kind of play in some ways to engage people in therapeutic conversations. So the idea of doing it all online or using technology seemed a little bit strange, really. And what happened in the organization I worked for was that someone mentioned technology, young people and mental health in the same funding application. And for some reason, I was asked to develop an online counseling service. So it all happened a bit accidentally. And I wasn't very interested in it, particularly to start with. And it didn't fit with my understanding of therapy. So I had to research it and try to understand it more. I spent a lot of time just chatting to people online before offering any therapy, just to understand what this world was like. And in that, I guess two things happened. One was that I developed lots of relationships with people that were kind of quite sort of interesting in the sense they weren't, or they were quite deep. So we had some very interesting conversations. And then the organization, the young people in the organization started emailing service. And even before we knew it, we were almost having to offer online therapy of sorts. So I guess that personal experience alongside the professional experience kind of meant that I had to understand this world that we were getting involved with in some way.
And I understand the interest right now, but when did you start really getting into this world?
So I think the organization, it would have been about the turn of the century, so about 1999, 2000, when we started developing the service. And since then, I've been involved in researching or working with organizations that have been offering online therapy since.
Yeah.
I wonder if at this point it might be useful for me to just talk a little bit about some of the history of online therapy.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
So I will just share a few slides.
Excellent.
So I will talk through a few slides about what I see to be the history or the past of online therapy before moving into the present and the future. And I would ask you, Zehra, if you would also contribute. We will, if maybe in between each of those sections, we can have a little bit of a conversation about
Yes.
some of those areas.
Yeah, would be delighted to.
So in terms of the past, and this links with some of my own previous experience, although not this far back, I guess counselling and psychotherapy they do have a relationship where people have always used technology in some way to enhance what we do. And I use this image in my training at Manchester with students to reflect the way that Carl Rogers, so one of the pioneers of humanistic psychology, integrated technology into his work. So in 1942, this book, Counselling and Psychotherapy, was published. And the second half of this book is a recording of his work with clients. And he used a machine, not unlike this one, to record his sessions so he could then reflect upon how he was working and how he may be able to do it better. And I think we often think about therapy as not being technological, but I think even people like Carl Rogers were using quite intrusive technologies within their work. And this is from 1943, so this is a quote about Carl Rogers' experience. So of using this recording equipment, and he notes, at the end of the data gathering period, approximately 100 interviews had been recorded. Many of these were partially spoiled as a result of the apparatus breakdown and defective cutting style. And since the research called for recordings of entire interviews could not be used. So I won't repeat the whole quote, but I guess that it highlights some of that technological problems they were having at that point in time, which I think reflect a number of people's more contemporary experiences. We will talk about COVID in a little while, but of really integrating technology into our current practices. Oh, and I put this image on because if anyone wants to try using one of these recording devices from the 1930s, they're still available on eBay at probably quite an expensive
Yes,
purchase.
a bit pricey.
Just a little.
Look at the postage.
It would be interesting to see what it would be like. I'm sure our students would moan if we asked them to record all of their through that. But then other advances or developments, not everyone views the use of technology as an advance in therapy, were some resources. So I guess during the 1960s, if you search ELIZA in Google, there is a very rudimentary chat device that follows person-centered counselling rules. It is quite funny to play with, and it is still available. So you may want to take a look. And then during the 70s, there were things like self-help tapes. During the turn of the century, lots of computerized cognitive behavioral therapy has become very big business, to the point that it is recommended within the United Kingdom for supporting people who may have anxiety or depression in some shape or form. And then also outside of that, I guess different ways of supporting people that people currently use are things like email and text messages, maybe internet relay chat, so that's chat rooms, people using telephone, using the audio element of computer-mediated communication, tele and video conferencing, as Zehra and I are using at the moment, and then maybe things like avatars. So I've got this little image down in the corner of where you may use a visual representation of who you are in a therapeutic context.
And can you choose your therapist in such an image as an avatar?
So in here, you would be able to create who you are. So you would be able to represent yourself, and there may be bits that you like or dislike about yourself more that you would choose to put in or not put in. So the therapist would choose an image like this, and the clients within this context would as well.
Right.
But at that point, I think that is where I'm going to stop sharing the screen before we move to talk about what may be happening now as a consequence of COVID and the current situation.
Sure.
But Zehra, this is where I will bounce the question back to you about kind of, you asked me how I got involved in this territory. And I wonder what, you completed a thesis project about online therapy with young people. What interested you in it?
It's a really good question. I guess I've done some school-based counseling before, and my experience with students, well, with young people really, was the fact that I was upset with the fact that they were online all the time, and that was not really long back. It was around 2018 to 2008. Yeah, no, 8, right? So it was not that long back, and young people were already online, and they were the inhabitants of that space, I would say, or art medium. And I was curious, intrigued about their intentions and why they felt really safe and like their presence there. But I also realized that maybe that could be actually an option for us to get them there, to help them there, approach them and make it accessible because of the stigma as well we experienced in Turkey back then. I like the idea of approaching them on a more open, in a more open space, let's say, on a more friendlier terms. Yeah. That's how I got into, and of course, finding a supervisor who was interested in the area was my luck. Changed my life really, and my understanding of what online therapy would look like. So yeah, I'm a bit involved in right now with my own personal experience as a professional, but also as a researcher as well.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And the bit you raised that I didn't mention, the links really, thinking of the conference theme, of thinking about, super diversity and how one of my interests was how the internet proved a really interesting context for enabling people who may not ordinarily contact face-to-face counsellors to access support. And some of the organisations and the young people I talked to in those organisations clearly reflected that they wouldn't have sought out support on face-to-face or in schools. Maybe if I go back to some...
Yeah. I mean, I would like to hear where we are at now.
I forgot
because
that.
Things are changing with,
Well, what I would do, what I what I forgot to mention previously, or this slide, was also that when we talk about using technology in therapeutic practice, we often think about computer-mediated work, but also we have to think that there are different ways that technologies come into our work, even in face-to-face work or in-person work. So we may already be creating websites, we may be using computers to book appointments, etc. And all of this side is more kind of the things that we've just been talking about, where people may want to use technology to actually mediate the therapy. But this is where I thought our slides were up to, is thinking about, well, what's happening now and what's happening because of this. So I guess this is a visual representation of COVID, and it's changed it's changed the lives of many people in many countries. I won't be exclusive. I'm sure there are certain people who haven't been affected, but I think certainly many of the countries that are involved in this conference will be impacted. And what we found, so a recent piece of research we did into looking at how a service is responding to this, really showed that people are also going online for support around issues related to COVID. So I guess we're seeing online service use increase phenomenally, and this paper that was published in Frontiers recently sort of highlighted that all services seem to show a real steep increase in usage, with issues around sort of things like anxiety, particularly health anxiety, loneliness, I guess, particularly in countries where there are periods of social lockdown occurring. Also, sort of instances of people being in unsafe domestic situations, so with domestic violence potentially increasing, which again, as people are locked down in close proximity with one another, may be predicted in some ways. And then the other area, sort of thinking of financial concerns. So lots of people may have lost their jobs or may have job uncertainty as a consequence of what's happening. So just visually, we may represent it almost. I've recently pulled together a paper where we talk about the idea of COVID being an evolutionary catalyst. So if we were to think of online therapeutic work without COVID, we might see it sort of just following this relatively low line. It's not very popular. Not many people were using it compared to face-to-face equivalents. Whereas now, as a consequence of COVID, we see that actually there's a real steep increase in the way that people are using online support services. And from my perspective, this will probably decrease when things get back to some semblance of normality, but not to the levels where they were before. I think things like Zoom and our sort of confidence and competence in using technology as a society will change some of that going forward.
Exactly.
I will stop sharing now, just so we can talk a little more.
So I wonder whether your work changed as a lecturer, as a professional, but also as a researcher on the virtual end.
Yeah, so on I suppose if I think about my therapeutic work first, I work as a football therapist with survivors of torture. And unfortunately, because of all of the lockdown, it meant that couldn't happen. So a lot of that work had to stop because it was viewed as unsafe. And I see that within my work as a lecturer at the university, where all of my trainees had to immediately stop working or to transfer their work online. So in the initial stages of lockdown, people were having to transfer their work into Zoom or where possible. And now I think all of our students have had some experience of working therapeutically online. Now, where we find it that lockdowns are easing, we have trainees who are working in a socially distanced way. So they may be sitting quite far away from the people they're supporting. They may be wearing face masks. And so all of these things become new practices that, as a discipline, we've had to understand. But as a person, as a professional, my work has changed dramatically. All of my teaching is now through this.
Yeah.
How is your experience?
And just, I would agree tremendously on what you encountered there. And one of the things that our trainees find difficult is the fact that sometimes clients did not want to share their videos, their appearances online. So, on synchronous based chat therapy. So we would come to the session knowing that, but at times, some of my trainees did experience that, and it challenged them. The fact that how we are gonna understand what they're going through, whether they cry or whether they're going to just self-harm themselves. So there were a lot of ethical dilemmas they felt they had to really think through. So this is what we are at right now, trying to find out an ethical stance, but also a competent stance with what we do online and now face-to-face, because of coming back to actual work.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think these seem like unknown times, and there's lots of uncertainty around. And one of the uncertainties is what technology will look like in the future. I imagine my teaching will involve more Zoom-based sessions, but I do not know for sure at the moment. You are in your office, I am in my home at the moment, and different countries will have different regulations and rules, worries and concerns that will be impacting them.
That's true. So, and that brings me to the question, so what do you expect the future bill will look like?
Well, I have some more slides here.
All right.
Too. So, in terms of going forward, I think you can see that. Can you see that, Zehra?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
So, I will talk a little bit about the future. And in terms of therapy, I wanted to almost provoke some thoughts, because this will not be for everyone. But I think working online will be kind of more prevalent, I think, for sure. But how might take in numerous different forms. So one, I point out kind of, this is a game that's based on cognitive behavioral therapy principles. So there is an element that some therapy will become more gamified, or it will take images like this. Likewise, below at the bottom is a view where people may be able to create images of landscapes in which they see themselves in. And this could be used in face-to-face work, not just online work as well.
Yeah.
Then, outside of that, we get even more. It seems even more like fantasy land in some ways, but isn't actually that far away. So people will start using things like virtual reality headsets to feel closer to one another. They may, or it is likely that artificial intelligence and machine learning will become a part of the landscape we work in. So I'm working on a project at the moment where they're trying to spot vulnerability indicators in audio conversations. They're a long way away from becoming useful, but particularly within audio work. But I think within text-based work, it is quite common now that there is artificial intelligence running in the background of communication between people. And this quote from Stephen Hawking, the physicist, where it says, computers are likely to overtake humans in intelligence at some point in the next 100 years. When that happens, we will need to make sure that we have the same goals aligned with ours. And I think the important thing there is thinking, well, I see it almost as an ethical duty to be involved in the conversation. As much as I see it as being potentially quite dehumanizing, I think there's a real potential in it growing in its use in a way that can be controlled by humans.
I hear you. Yeah. Wow.
So I don't. At that point, I wonder. I realize I have 2 more slides that I would share. Should I share them now?
Yeah. Please go on.
Because
And then,
I think this links again to the kind of idea of the conference theme around sort of diversity. Because within the therapeutic work that and I know you share, is this idea that one size doesn't fit all. So for some people, using technology, using virtual reality may be a really positive thing, but for some people it won't be. And so the final bit that I would share is this. This was from work with an online counselling provider for children and young people. It was a summary of a piece of work looking at how they worked as an organisation. And really, we had to sort of reconceptualize how we viewed what a therapist did, to really thinking of what the ecosystem, what the whole kind of system of the website was offering. And this offered kind of, this particular website tried to offer this positive environment. It was sort of caring, non-judgmental, safe, etc. It offered static content, so magazine content. It enabled people to connect via moderated forums. And then it also enabled people to access direct professional support with a counsellor or social worker, etc. So it was this interaction between all of these different support systems that become the ecosystem. Now, this is one organisation, and I guess the challenge going forward is going to be, how do these start integrating with face-to-face services, other online services, family networks, etc., etc. And I really think this is going to be part of the debate, is not viewing therapy as individuals, but thinking about that ecosystem of support in some ways going forward.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop sharing there.
Oh, wow, thank you. The last slide especially gives me a context where we are at with SIPCC as well. That we also are trying to create this positive ecosystem where different religions and cultures and backgrounds, races and ethnicities can just all come together, and recognizing the fact that one size does not fit all. We will need to explore, I agree with you, the fact that we have responsibility over what future will look like, or about psychotherapy in general, or spiritual care and counseling in general, right? And so this gives us a great opportunity to be able to have a understanding of what future might offer us, and what we can really dive into it, and whether we are ready to dive in it.
I think that's the big question at the end.
Yeah.
Whether or not we are. I think technology will keep being used, but how it will be used is going to be part of the important question in some ways.
But the conversation will flow, right? Will go on. And then this is our part. Thank you, Terry. Thank you so much for your time. And we'll see you in the conference. And then we'll have more discussions around.
You're welcome, Zehra. It's been a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing everyone. I hope it's provoked some thoughts with everyone. And I look forward to talking to you at the conference.
All right. You look after. Take care.